Hello. How is everyone? Just gonna wait for Sinead. Oh, my camera's doing that weird zoomy thing. Hopefully it doesn't freak out. Sorry if it's doing this little jumpy thing. Hello. Hi Sinead. Hopefully she can get on.
Hello.
Hi Sinead, how are you? Can you hear me all right?
Good.
Perfect. Yeah, I was just apologising to those who are on because my camera last week was doing this weird jumpy thing, so I'm hoping it doesn't do it. Kind of doing it now, so I thought I'd fixed it, but we'll see how it goes. But
Oh,
sure,
well, it looks
anyway,
okay for
hopefully
me
it's not too
anyway.
distracting. Thanks. I yeah, it's my little backdrop for my studio, so it's good.
Very cool. Very nice.
Thanks. Perfect. Well, look, I will just waiting for a few of the people to kind of join now, but I'm just going to do a quick introduction to what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome everyone. Today is the Friday Flowdown, and it's actually the first episode of the Friday Flowdown with a guest, which is super exciting. And of course, our guest is Sinead Delahunty, who I have on with me here. So for those of you who don't know Sinead, she is an award-winning food blogger, which is great, and also the author of the Delicious cookbook. She's a physiotherapist, and she's also a Gaelic footballer with Tipperary, and then it's Foxrock Cabinteely, is it? I know there's
Yeah,
really no Gaelic
podcast.
football at the minute. Yeah. And then as well, you're obviously a member of Fit Fast Stronger Gyms as well, which is where I know you from. That's where this whole
Yeah.
kind of friendship started. So it's great to have you on. Thanks so much.
No, thanks for having me. Delighted to be part of it. And
Yeah,
yeah,
no
you're doing
problem.
such amazing stuff with your old page and everything. So yeah,
Oh,
congrats.
thank you. Yeah, spreading the words. That's what we're trying to do. So basically, what we're going to be talking about today is period loss. So amenorrhea, which you were going to be talking about your experience with that as well, Sinead. But kind of before we go into that in a little bit more detail, I'm just going to do a quick recap on what amenorrhea is. So I know I posted about it earlier in the week, but some people kind of may not be familiar with the terminology or what's actually involved with it. So essentially, amenorrhea is period loss, as I mentioned. There's a couple of different types. So there's like primary amenorrhea, which is where you don't actually get your period by the time you're 16, and then there's secondary amenorrhea, which is kind of what we'll be discussing today, which is where you've started your period and have had a cycle, but then you've lost it, and typically you've lost it for over 3 months. There's kind of a number of different reasons why that may happen, but again, the one that we're going to be talking about today is functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is a bit of a mouthful, but essentially it's all to do with your hypothalamus. So hypothalamus is a small little thing in your brain, and essentially it's quite susceptible to stress, to whether that's physical or psychological. So physical could be overtraining, and then also to how much you're fueling. So whether you're under fueling, whether you're getting a good mix of the different kind of macronutrients, all that kind of stuff. And essentially it's the control center for our body. So it controls all of our reproductive systems. And if it's not happy and in balance, basically it's like, it's not a good time to have a baby. So I'm going to shut down your reproductive cycle, which may be a concern if fertility is an issue, but is also a massive concern for kind of health issues and kind of sports performance, bone health, mental health, all that kind of stuff. So that's for everyone listening. That's a quick little recap of what it is and what we'll be discussing today. So Sinead, yeah, so thanks again for coming on. And I guess I'm just going to open up by saying, like, do you want to start off by telling us about your experience? When did you first notice that you'd kind of lost your period, and how did that all happen?
Yeah. So I suppose I was like playing county football at the time. I'm
Mm.
working like a busy job in the hospital as a physio, and then alongside that playing like club football as well. So
Mm.
it was back in 2015. So I turned 25, so I'm 30 this year. And
Great
yeah,
age.
so I felt like I wasn't going to the doctor or anything, and
Yeah, yeah,
anyway, I suddenly was going like, because I got like my sphere when you turn 25, you get sent,
yeah.
the letter to get your test done. So I, that was fine. And then I'm in getting that done, and they're like, oh, anything else, like, or, any issues, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah, to be honest, my period is kind of like stopped for the last 3 months. And they were like, oh, right. And like, first of all, they're like, oh, you're pregnant. And I'm like, no, not
Yeah,
pregnant.
yeah, yeah.
And they're like, okay, okay. And, kind of going through a history. And then they were like, oh, listen, we'll send you off for some tests. So like, they kind of initially were like working me up for like a diagnosis of like cancer. I
Yeah.
kind of very much felt I couldn't have cancer. I suppose I was
Yeah.
like playing so much sport and like really, really healthy. Obviously you can
Yeah.
still have it at any time, but I was like, oh, like I don't think it's that.
Yeah.
So anyway, like kind of that took, a period of time, whatever. Like I just still continued doing what I was doing. It didn't
Yeah.
really bother me not having my period. I suppose like, it was a bit of a convenience at the start. Um, yeah, and then like it just the longer it was going on, I was kind of like, oh, kind of like, why is this happening? Obviously, maybe times when I traveled before, yeah, it was nearly more when I traveled before, maybe I might like skip a period or something like that. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I had a monthly period. So then, it was kind of quite medicalized, getting all these investigations done. They all came back fine. So
Yeah.
then they sent me to see a gynecologist then in the hospital that I work in. So I went to meet with her. Like I had been doing some like reading myself, we'll say,
Yeah.
and like why I could lose it. And I suppose at the time the term they were using was the female athlete's triad.
Yeah.
And for anyone
Exactly.
maybe who's read up on it before, it's now called like red S, but it would have been very much like skewed towards like endurance athletes. And like
Yeah.
I felt like, oh well, like, I don't run marathons. I might cycle, but like not for hours on end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not a triathlete, so I'm not really any of these people. Like, I play a sprint sport. And like yeah, I train a
Yeah.
lot.
It doesn't really resonate.
It wasn't really me. So anyway, I meant to meet with this gynecologist, and she was like, oh yeah, like there's nothing serious wrong, but she's like, oh, they did like my BMI, but like it was healthy, and then they're going to talk about training and stuff like that, and then she's just kind of
Mm.
like, oh, like you need to stop training. But like I was playing county sport, I was doing
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
well with a very successful club. I was like, oh, like that can't happen. Like I
Yeah.
want to do all these things, like that's not going to happen. So then they were talking then about kind of like my diet and stuff, and they're like, oh, like we'll refer you on to like a dietitian.
Yeah. I
um
see.
but I suppose like with backlog in the hospital, like we have finite amount of dietitians and not for
Of
outpatients at all,
course.
so like that just I never heard that kind of loophole, just kind of went completely by the
Yeah. Yeah.
by. So in that case, like it's very much just kind of you're left to your own devices. So that was probably coming into like 2016. By the time, obviously everything was
Yeah.
done. And yeah, so they, kind of were saying like, oh yeah, my periods were due to like kind of overtraining. And then how to manage that was like by completely stopping the sport.
Yeah.
So I kind of went off then and did like kind of more reading and just kind of self-managing myself. So then I did like look towards my diet and ensuring like, I was getting like adequate fuel sources and protein, and whatnot in. But still like that didn't change my period at all. It still like was completely absent. So
Yeah.
then I went on a career break at the end then of 2016. So it was complete like absolutely, changing my daily routine. I wasn't playing my sports
Yeah. Yeah.
anymore. Still really active, but like didn't have like, stress from work or like anything like that. And yeah, so like within then like 5 months of traveling, I just suddenly got my period right back.
Okay.
I probably had put on like, a bit of weight, obviously had changed my
Yeah.
exercise
Yeah.
level completely. In terms of eating, I probably had spent the first 2 months down in South America, and anyone who's been there,
Yeah.
like you eat a bread roll and some dulce de leche for your breakfast, and
Yeah. Exactly.
but like, still like I was keeping my food that going, so still, eating very well. So
Yeah.
since, May 2017, I've had a regular period. And
Right.
it's just kind of would say like kind of skipped or like kind of doubled up, which can happen to lots of people.
Mm.
Like I'd say less than 5 times. And a lot of that, I can directly correlate now to like being in a stressful like situation or just having too much on.
Yeah.
Or likewise at the start of COVID, like lots of people, their menstrual cycles just went completely out the
Yeah.
window.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so did mine, but like I was working total different like way and whatnot. And obviously like, it was a stressful situation for everyone. So yeah, like I think like overall, definitely like some weight gain. I'm definitely not the weight I was when I was, playing county football
Yeah,
back in
yeah.
2015, 2016. But really for me, like it's like the stress kind of management and like taking things like so
Mm.
off my plate has worked really well. I like
Good.
alongside then like some like dietary changes then as well, just in terms of like maintaining
Yeah,
adequate protein sources and carbohydrate sources and things like that. So like
yeah,
it's really simple changes, but like it's totally like I think for me like a mindset approach to it as well. Like I think there's so many more great resources like yourself, like and would say Fitter Woman. So
yeah.
I'm an ambassador for them. So when I got asked to come on board and they're working with the LGFA, they didn't actually realise like this is my story at all.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but like having resources like that out there now are just incredible. It's just like opened up the conversation a lot more. Like I didn't know anyone like who had been in this scenario at all, and now like
Yeah.
I know lots of people. So like it's unfortunately quite a normal thing. But there's a lot more help out there, and like sometimes I was like fully well, um, looked into from a medical point of view, and thankfully there wasn't, anything, sinister,
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
But the resources just unfortunately aren't there, to really support people. And
Mm.
definitely, like if I had met with a dietitian at that time, or potentially even like really like had like cognitive behavioral therapy, or maybe had like psychology input,
Yeah,
I think that could have been better, like at the time. But obviously, that's with hindsight and a lot of reflection, like on my part, and
yeah,
yeah, a lot of self management really as well, and it's constant self management.
yeah. And I think it is what you were talking about was the I thought it was interesting when you mentioned the female athlete triad, but hey, that's actually changed to Red S.
Mm.
So just for, I guess, for those who are listening, the female athlete triad, back kind of before 2014, I think was when it was changed. The female athlete triad was considered like low bone mineral density menstrual disturbance, which could be your loss of your period, but even just kind of, luteal defect, which is when it's a shorter luteal phase and things like this. But commonly it would be loss of period. And then also I think they classified it as like an eating disorder as well, which
Yeah,
thankfully has been widened out to the relative energy deficiency in sport, because, I think what can happen a lot is it's about people not understanding that they're underfueling, or they're not aware that maybe the stress is having an impact on their menstrual cycle, and also the fact that it can impact guys as well.
yeah,
There was this kind of, obviously the terminology female athlete triad, it's something that seems like it's only applicable to women. Now our reproductive cycles tend to be a little bit more sensitive to it, but it's definitely something that can impact guys as well, and they can have low testosterone levels as a result of kind of overtraining and underfueling, or being in a stressful situation. But it's more, and it is more commonly seen. Again, the literature kind of tends to look at more, I guess, endurance-based sports, like you mentioned, or even kind of weight-based sports. So say sports you got to cut down a weight, or it's a kind of a weight to strength ratio. But it can happen to anyone with any BMI, and I think that's something that isn't discussed enough, or that people aren't aware of. They're like, oh, you have to be the super lean athlete to have any sort of menstrual cycle disturbance, and that's not actually the case. You can use your cycle within what's classified as a normal BMI, or like, it's so, and even that, like the normal BMI, it's kind of a whole separate topic, I guess. But it is something that's a lot more common, as you said, than people realize. And also I've heard stories of people just being like, medical health professionals being like, well, yeah, like that's normal if you're going to train that amount, but that's not actually, that doesn't have to be the case. You can train at that high level, but make sure that you're fueling yourself correctly, recovering correctly, and also managing other stresses in your life to help mitigate against those negative impacts to your menstrual cycle. So yeah, like even on your story there, where kind of it took so long for you to figure out what was going on, or what was the root cause of it,
Oh
it
yeah,
is
like
a bit of a
and
challenge.
so much, like yeah, definitely like so much like self reflection.
Yeah,
But like that has like aided so much now to know like when my routine changes or things change, like what's the cause of it. I can be
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh yeah, okay, yeah, I'm not sleeping enough, or yeah, I've we'll say now when I go back hopefully to train again for football, when things ease up the restrictions, like that I'll have to like be mindful again now. Okay, yeah, you're
yeah,
completely changing your exercise and your fueling routine, so how are you going to
yeah,
maintain this like balance of things is just so
absolutely.
important.
But especially in the profession that you're in, where you're on your feet all day, and it's the same with me as a coach now. I'm also coaching from home, so it's a little bit less, I guess, activity based, but still, and I know you attended the workshop that I did with the Go with the Flow stuff, kind of talking about this. But what tends to shock people a lot when I bring up the numbers of what we should be consuming as, I guess, active women, people find quite shocking is then like, no, surely not, because the numbers, the research shows that like minimum between 2,000 to 2,500 calories is what you should be consuming as an active female. Now, generally speaking, I'm not a big advocate of counting calories, because that is a whole other, side of things, and really it's zero crack just tracking calories all the time. But it's a really good indicator just to see where you're at, because we do get bombarded with these messages being like, oh, 1,200 calories is what I should be eating to kind of make sure I'm like, losing weight, as in what all the kind of diet books tell me. And like, that's what a toddler eats.
I know.
Like, that's the calorific needs of a toddler. Like, it's not what we need to fuel ourselves for now. And again, that might mean that your body fat percentage is maybe a little bit higher than whatever the ideal is right now. And you kind of mentioned that where you maybe put on a bit more body fat than you had before, and you were kind of eating foods that maybe you might not have eaten before, but they're all actually what we need to fuel ourselves, and also in most cases to regain your cycle as well. And again, I think it's important to point out that different people are going to lose their cycle for different reasons. Some people it might be overtraining and too high intense exercise. Other people it might be underfueling, and then for others it might be stress, or a combination.
Yeah, like I feel like
each of those,
like all of them like muddled into the mix, which is really hard then to find like, exactly which one was the driver, which one you're directly, improving on. But even that, like, in terms of the activity, like at that time we probably had like a third of the physiotherapy staff we currently have in the hospital.
Yeah.
And like, if you talk to any of my colleagues, we're like, oh my God, we were like headless chickens running around the place all day long, like just covering every inch of the hospital. And now like just simple things like more staff, you have less stress, you can do your job better, and like less activity. And it can be something like that, or like in my profession as well, like we rotate a lot, so you might be spending more time in an outpatient setting to an inpatient setting, and like all of that has different stressors on you and different routines on you and different expectations, that it can be so hard to like pick out exactly what is the cause. And that's really hard.
And like for you, I know you kind of mentioned it was when you were going for the cervical smoothie, you were kind of like, actually I should raise this, but like had you noticed it before, or like when was the point that you were like, actually I should try and start making changes to my lifestyle?
Yeah, like, like kind of like I skipped one. I was like, oh yeah, like, it'll probably be grand, it'll be here, in the kind of next month. And then the second one I was like, oh, hang on, like kind of why is this happening? And then when it happened like 3 months consecutively, I was like, that's when definitely I was like looking up things, doing a bit of research. And then I suppose it just kind of like timed nicely, kind of with an opportunity then with like a health professional, like with my GP then when I was getting my smear. I suppose as well for me, like being a health professional, like there was probably a sense of like kind of like, oh, I should be better at this, like, or I should know what to do, or like definitely a sense of like, oh, like you're letting yourself down here kind of thing, like, which like I'm not an expert in gynecological health or anything like that, but I always say to my patients like that you are your own expert, so that you know your body best, and you will be able to like guide anyone who's helping you, like in things that work or don't work. So definitely in terms of that, like, it's reaching out for support. But again, like I didn't know anyone who'd had this, so I didn't know where to go for support. That was the kind of thing, which again, as I'm saying, like there's so much more support out there now in the mainstream.
Absolutely.
And
but even in the media,
it's just like normal, to talk about this now. And even I did a talk there before Christmas with minor club mates in my club, and I had done a talk maybe like 2 years previously with them as like kind of like under 16s, and like the difference, I'd talked to them about like fitter woman at that stage and menstrual health, and then talking to them 2 years later, and I was like, when 2 years previously they didn't know anything about this, whatever, but they took it on board. And then 2 years later I was like, oh, does anyone use these apps? And like about half of them were using them, and I was just like, this is incredible. Like just
Yeah,
a sea change for like just for like people that age to be talking about it and it to be completely normal, and then for
yeah,
like likewise them to be using it. So like to have all these strategies at such a young age, that like yeah, when things can be totally normal, but like your life just goes through such transitions, and that they have all these tools straight away to nip things in the bud, which is always much easier to
yeah,
manage. And like they were like completely at ease talking about it. I got a few of them like to tell the others about it and what was great about it and whatnot.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it was just incredible. I was just like, oh wow, God.
It is super. And like, I think that's always the first step is just like understanding what your normal cycle is. Because like to your point, when you were going in, like, and again, I talk about this in my talk where like the doctor, as a woman or someone who menstruates, like the doctor's going to ask you when your last period was. And like so many times I'd be like, I have no idea. And then I'd be trying to like flick back through my calendar and genuinely remember what thing I was doing that time that I last got my period. And like, we should just know that, you know?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I actually just saw a question that popped up is about what apps you recommend. So I know like Sinead's a big fan of Fitter
Hmm.
Woman, which is brilliant and a really good, I guess, like starting point to like understand your cycle. And, you know, it gives you like training and nutrition tips and like super recipes as well, which is great to kind of help support the different phase that you're at. So that's kind of, I guess, a starting point. Even actually, even before that, a starting point is like just writing it down in your diary, like write it down in your Google Diary, like blood emoji, day one, like happy
Yeah.
face, I'm feeling good, sad face, I'm not feeling good, you know, see how long it is. I'm personally, because I take my temperature, my basal body temperature, I use kind of a mix between Fitter Woman and then Fem app or Natural Cycles. So Natural Cycles you can take, but the Fem app is one that kind of looks at things like cervical mucus, and kind of you can track your temperatures in that as well and see it in a graph. So personally, I prefer those because for me, I found out through my temperature that I had the luteal phase defect, which is like an earlier menstrual disturbance on that kind of spectrum of menstrual disturbance with the kind of period loss being the end. So personally, I like doing that and I've kind of kept that up myself. So that's why I tend to recommend those. But Fitter Woman's great, or just writing it in your calendar.
Yeah, like, and I find like Fitter Woman, like, because there's like a calendar, so you can like put in like
Mm,
if you have your period, and then just like symptoms. So like I think for tracking like PMS as well, it's really
yeah,
handy. And even if your like period is going to come a bit early, you can kind of like preempt, be like, oh yeah, I'm always like this,
yeah,
like a couple of days ahead.
absolutely.
Um, or even to track like you're not recovering well, like heavy legs or whatnot, or just a bit
Yeah,
irritable.
yeah,
I find it then easy just to like track my training as well, so I can kind of look back and see, oh yeah, you're doing a bit too
exactly.
much there, or you weren't recovering enough or whatnot.
Yeah. And like the tracking as well, it's so important because it really is an indicator of something's up. So, you know, obviously if you've lost your cycle, there's going to be fertility impact to that.
Mhm.
But for some of us, that may not be a concern or priority right now because you might not be, you know, trying to conceive or might just not be on the radar at all. But if you are not ovulating, you aren't producing your sex hormones that you need that actually do
Yes.
so many other things. So like bone mineral density, which I kind of mentioned before, like you need estrogen to have strong bones and you need progesterone to maintain those strong bones. Progesterone, super important for like mental health, like having kind of low estrogen is not great. It's been linked to kind of mental health issues, heart health issues, all this kind of stuff that people just don't know about. And they're kind of, again, told that kind of line, well, oh yeah, it's common for someone who's active, but you're not only are you leaving something on the table with regards to performance, but you're actually impacting your overall health. Like you can be in your 20s and have osteoporosis or brittle bones because you haven't had a cycle for X amount of years, you know?
Yeah.
And that's like, that just shouldn't be happening, you
No,
know?
and that was what I was like, definitely, like I didn't want to start a family or anything like that
Yeah.
at the time. But for me, it was definitely like my bone health. I was like most worried about.
Mm,
And particularly like the longer, the period loss was going on, I was like, oh, what's the long-term effect of this?
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Thankfully, my bone stock was absolutely fine. I got a DEXA done.
Okay.
But definitely in terms of like, yeah, estrogen and progesterone, they were like incredibly low, and they've
Yeah.
really only picked up this year, and that's
Okay.
like 3 years on from having a
Yeah.
regular period. So they take, well, for me, they took ages to like
Yeah.
stabilize back to normal levels. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, then like obviously in terms of fertility and stuff like that, in terms of long term, yeah, I was quite worried about that.
Yeah,
And if you're saying there about the mental health, 100%. Like, I can look back now and be like, oh, I was like absolutely like,
yeah.
the smallest thing would like set me off, or like, definitely when I was playing counties, put myself under so much pressure. And like was at the start of the season, like I was doing really well, but the longer the season was going on in terms of my performance, like it just
Mm,
hit a plateau. Like, I couldn't make any more gains. And
yeah.
obviously that was like over a year into having period loss. So it was all just like
Mm.
banking up, accumulating really. All that, when I look back now, it wasn't like me not training hard enough or something like that, not
Yeah.
putting in enough. It's just like my body couldn't
You
give
didn't have
anything
you didn't
more.
have the building blocks to do it. And like
No.
again, there's kind of a paper that I research or reference in the talk studies. So I know you've heard this before, but just for everyone else who's listening, they did a study with like swimmers, and
Mhm.
half the group had a regular menstrual cycle and the other half didn't have a period. And they put them on like a 12-week training program that was supposed to improve their like 400-meter speed. And not only did the group who didn't have a cycle, their like bone, their IGF-1, which is like their bone mineral density hormone, went down.
Mhm.
Their thyroid health went down as well. Their thyroid markers decreased, and then their speed decreased. So they didn't like, not only did they just like maintain or plateau, they actually got slower.
Yeah.
So you're not only are you not prioritizing health, but you're actually missing something with regards to your performance. But like, it's a tough one because I know that you mentioned like at the time you weren't, you're like, I'm not in a position to stop training or stop kind of competing at that level. So I think, this is one of the questions that came in as well, being like, look, I love X sport, or I love working out, and I kind of like, HIIT or CrossFit style workouts. Like, for me, or running, it kind of helps me reduce my stress. And it is a challenging one because often what does need to happen is reducing that intensity of the
Mhm.
exercise, but it depends on where you're at. And again, there's kind of different camps on this. So if you're at an elite level, that's going to be harder to do because you're trying to still compete. So it's about trying to work with your coaches, and if you have a nutrition team or if you have a kind of physician, you can try and figure what that looks like, to kind of help you regain your period. But then, for, I guess, if you're a recreational athlete, even if you're taking it seriously, like, it is something to consider dropping down the intensity for a while. And it sounds like when you did that, that was one of the factors that kind of helped you get back your cycle, as well as just reduce stress, as well as kind of probably eating more. Um, so it is something to kind of take in mind, and it can be challenging, and I'm sure if someone turned around to me and was like, yeah, you can't do any of your training, I'd be like, okay, and find
Oh
that
yeah,
really
no,
hard,
you don't want to hear it at all. Like,
No,
so
absolutely.
that's why I think, like, yeah, actually understanding, why you be doing, a
Yeah,
change, and even like doing it for a while and reassessing, the benefit
absolutely.
of it,
Mm,
is huge. So that's why I think, like, yeah, you really need coaching through this. Like,
yeah,
it's impossible to do by yourself. Like, I don't
yeah,
know, would have I have just, if I hadn't gone traveling, I
yeah,
can't
exactly.
say that things would have returned. And it was only like when I was traveling, and then it comes back and I'm like, okay, why is it, it wasn't
Yeah,
like I moved country or continent, why did it suddenly come back? And I had
mm,
done obviously a lot of like self-education on the topic at that stage, that I could kind of like
yeah,
piece all the puzzles together. And then it was nearly more when I went back to like normality and back working and whatnot. It was like
yeah,
back training again. It was like, okay, now you have to try and keep this. So what are you going to
yeah,
do?
yeah,
But like, yeah, so tough. And like, as we constantly saying, there are so many differences with each person. But
yeah,
I think definitely, yeah, in terms of the intensity of training is huge. And thankfully, like, coaches are a lot more education on the topic. Like, I know you've done
yeah,
lots of work, both in FFS and with lots of different sports teams, and there's
yeah,
a lot more like normality around the topic. So like, both from players but also from management, that they're like, oh yeah, hang on, yeah, this is just like any other injury, that we need to taper your training, and likewise,
absolutely.
progress your training, as things are improving, that it's not
Yeah,
something
and
just to be ignored.
I think a lot of that is that education piece. And sorry, I know my camera's going weird again, so I'm going to sort it out for the next one. I don't know why it's doing this, but it is the education piece. And like, I think that's again where the International Olympic Committee, where they kind of came up with the new definition of red S, kind of helps that a lot. And the conversation,
Mhm.
there's so many research that are out there that are really kind of doing a lot of work in this area. And there's also a fab book called No Period Now What. Now it's a little bit more focused on trying to get your cycle back for having a family, but very
Mhm.
much I guess targeted at people who be like type A personalities, like love the high intensity sports, like very much part of their identity. Again, kind of probably body image and leanness kind of caught up in that as well, which is a whole other kind of side of it, but a really important one because, if your identity is being an athlete or being lean or being a certain size or whatever that might be, and then all of a sudden you're kind of being told that, okay, you're going to have to try and eat more and you're going to have to eat all those foods that you probably didn't eat before and wouldn't associate with you as a person or, your healthy lifestyle. And you're probably going to have to reduce that intensity. Like that's a whole lot of change. But would really recommend it because it's fascinating. And again, for anyone who's nerdy like me, it's got loads of really good references in it. And what is also fantastic in it is that it's got stories from people who've gone through it themselves. Again, so I just kind of like, relate, makes it more relatable. And they've like so many different chapters. You can kind of pick and choose if you want to just like read the ones about kind of how to maybe she calls it going all in. And that's like, again, that probably that more applicable if you're not trying to manage that with a sport. But even if you are trying to do it with a sport, and this is when it goes back to that coaches thing, it's just like, knowledge and knowing, as you said, what that is, that actually this is something that's important and it impacts not only your health but also your performance. So trying to taper that back, treating it like an injury, normalizing that conversation, because like I don't know about you, but no one's ever asked me as a coach, what's your cycle like? You know what I mean? Like, do you have a regular cycle? I think if someone asked me that, I'd be like, what? But like, it is
Yeah.
something that should at least, it's not at a coach level, like, and hopefully we get to a stage where it is just like a normal conversation. It should be like, how's your recovery? How's your sleep? Like, what's your
Mhm.
injury status like? That someone's like, okay, well, what's your cycle? Like, are you having issues? Do you suffer really bad period pain? Have you lost your cycle? Is your cycle irregular? Because it's important. It is another, I guess, biomarker or like factor to take into consideration, just as you would if how you're recovering or how your sleep is. But
Yeah,
that's twofold.
literally.
One, it's
And like
about,
you saw
yeah,
recently, like, or well, nearly 2 years ago now, but we're like with the USA soccer team and like with Chelsea
yeah,
FC, the women's team, like they're using it constantly and they're getting like,
yeah.
incredible results. Um,
Absolutely.
and even speaking to like other athletes that I know, two very high performing sports women here in Ireland, and like they've been through the exact same story as me,
Yeah.
and like they unfortunately got really bad injuries as well at the same
Yeah.
time. So the whole body is just absolutely on its last legs, and it's
Yeah.
just clinging on to anything, and particularly one of those got a stress fracture, so directly related
Yeah.
to the
It's tough.
bone mineral density effects that it can have. Yeah.
Yeah. But it is like that's, I think the injury one is important to mention as well because it is one of the, I guess, flags of um relative energy deficiency or period loss are kind of associated. So like typically if you're underfueling, it's things like you're feeling cold all the time, you're tired, you're tired but you can't sleep because again your cortisol levels go totally out of whack. And they tend to elevate and you don't have progesterone, which helps you sleep. So you tend to kind of wake up in the middle of the night. Um, Bone fractures, your strength goes down, your endurance gets impacted. Even things like, if again, I'd encourage anyone who's a coach here or even kind of an athlete at that level, you want to learn more about it, look up the red S, and I'll be doing a post on it later, probably tomorrow because it's going to be too late now to do it because it's a Friday. But they kind of have like this lovely little, I guess, circle that has all the different psychological and physiological impacts of it. And it's just important to know because once you start seeing these things, you can start piecing it together. And one of those is the kind of recurring injuries and not being able to recover a lot. And I think it is just important about finding what your causes are. And we all saw during COVID, like the stress that happened,
Mm.
and like worldwide, everyone was like, "Whose period's gone weird? My cycle's like 35 days long, and like blah blah blah, or I've lost it for 2 weeks." And it's I think in a weird way it was good because it actually showcased how much stress and chronic stress, like what's your work like, what's your mental health like, all of these things can also impact your reproductive and your physical health. So it is really important to kind of understand what the causes are and what your cause might be. So Yeah, it's a huge one,
Oh
definitely.
no, definitely, yeah, and totally. Like it's yeah, like I think that brought like the issue kind of into everyone's like house and everyone's life.
Mm,
But oh yeah, I would say for me, like that would be a huge one. Like, yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
And it's one of those things as well, like I think again if there's any coaches here from a sports point of view, like look up that red S one because they've even got like a screening form that you can do with
Mm.
athletes to try and, make sure that that's basically trying to see where they're at with regards to their health and kind of what the protocols might be to kind of help them get their cycle back or maybe kind of taper their training or even kind of for I guess suspend kind of their competitions for a certain while. Obviously different criteria are going to need different, I guess, outcomes or kind of what's the word I'm looking for in
Intervention.
interventions. I was going to say incentives. I was like, not incentives, interventions. So it's kind of important to have a look at that as well because not only obviously from an elite athlete point of view, performance is going to be important, but health underlines that. And then from all of us who are take our training seriously, but are recreational, I guess it's your health, and it's about trying to have that conversation about like, well, what's actually more important here, and trying to kind of unpick why you may or may not be struggling to try and get back on that kind of road to recovery. It's a challenging one. And I know for me, I'm the same as you, stress and underfueling are my kind of two big main ones. And so whenever I tend to kind of notice that the second half of my cycle is getting short again, it's I'm really stressed, or I'm just not eating enough. And again, I don't typically recommend people to track calories. This is something that we kind of talked about as well. It's like go in every now and again to the MyFitnessPal if it's not going to be triggering for you, and just see where you're at. Because more often than not, you haven't eaten enough and you've gone for a long gap in your day. If you're working in the kind of physiotherapy ward, or if you're kind of on your feet or just running around the office, and you've actually only eaten like 1,200 calories that day, and you've gone for like 5 hours that day without actually eating anything. So no wonder your body's thinking you're in
Oh
a stress or a
yeah,
famine state, and it's not going to kind of make your reproductive hormones. So,
definitely. And on that, I'd recommend people keep an eye out for the Hexus Performance app. So I'm
okay,
currently trialing it for them,
interesting.
and it's really, really good. So like you can put in your kind of like whatever your work kind of activity status is, and then
Mm.
like the training times, and then it will like build
Oh,
through kind of
super.
like how many calories you should be eating at each stage of the day to meet
I like
your
it.
training needs. So I find that really, really useful
Yeah,
now. Then. Yeah, yeah,
so
really,
useful
really good.
because that again for me like is so hard, especially if you're in the gym. Again, it's a little bit easier now at home, but even at home, like if you don't have stuff, I call it grab and go food. If you don't have stuff that's easy to grab and eat, like have the hard boiled eggs, so you can make a quick sandwich, have the yogurt with some granola in it, get the takeaway every now and again, and it's not going
Yeah,
to be the end of the world. But making sure that you can, like, again, Craig, everyone who knows kind of me and Craig's relationship, Craig does most of the cooking in our house,
you've
which
done
I'm
very
super
well
glad
so
about.
far,
I
Sinead.
do, I do. I'm trying to convince him to come on and do a talk to me, and he's like, I don't know. But anyway, he'll kill me for saying that. But anyway, so he does, but we do like a big kind of batch cook on the weekend. He does a big batch cook, and then I just make sure that I have my easy grab and goes because if like I have to fend for myself, I want to make something that's going to be nutritious, full of all the good stuff, like, getting the healthy fats in, getting the kind of protein in, the carbohydrates, some vegetables in there as well. And again, having snacks because minimum, as I said, that 2,000 to 2,500 calories, like typically for most of us, that's going to look like 3 meals a day with two snacks. And most people go without having any snacks or no
Yeah,
breakfast. But you're really missing a trick there, specifically if you are training as well, and if you're at a performance. So there's like it's like 45 plus percentage of recreational female athletes are at risk of red S or some sort of low energy availability state, which is huge. Like that's massive. And, you know, it just shouldn't really be the case. So
no, definitely. And
there's
as you always advocate, like not to train fasted, like for anyone who
yes,
trains first thing in the morning before they have their breakfast, like, from your workshops, like picked up really good tips, just like half banana and a bit of peanut butter, something
yeah,
like
just
that.
have
And you don't
something.
feel stuffed, but you like have enough energy and, to get more out of your workout. So yeah,
Yeah,
for me, like who normally train before work, like that's really, really, it's like simple tip, but like makes such a difference.
yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, it's one of those things to note that if anyone is going to speak to anyone about this or try and get support, and well, hopefully you aren't met with this, but if you are met with the kind of narrative that it's normal and it's not something to worry about. That's not the answer. So try and get a second opinion and try and dig into what's causing it. You know, is it kind of a thyroid issue? Is it like the hypothalamic amenorrhea that we discussed? Is it, you know, stress, underfeeding, whatever it might be? And as well, to be mindful that if you're on the pills or if you're on some form of hormonal contraception, you won't be getting a kind of natural cycle. So you'll be getting a withdrawal bleed. So potentially you could actually be in a low energy availability state, but you don't know it because you're not getting that natural cycle because you're the synthetic hormones of the pill are stopping you ovulating anyway. So it's just important to kind of keep that in mind, that if you're like, oh, well, I'm getting a regular period because I'm on the pill, that's not necessarily the case. And actually, you could still be in a low
end. Me, Sinead, like, because I'm like, how many people actually could be in the same boat?
Yeah,
you know, but they just don't know about it.
Like, there was a fantastic episode on the Female Athlete Pod. I can't remember who it was with. Was it one of the hosts? But they were talking about how they were on the pill and they didn't realize that they had RED-S.
Yeah.
And they ended up getting a stress fracture because of it. And you know, and that's not to say that being on the pill is bad. And there's kind of, you know, again, different camps about this, but it's just something to be aware of, that if you are on the pill, it may not be as easy to notice it. Where if you're having your natural cycle and it goes, that's normally a red flag that something's going on. So yeah, I'm trying to think. I've kind of covered all the questions just through asking you questions that I got today. There was none to go. Now we got one or two popped up there, but I guess kind of just to round it out, unless anyone has any other questions that they want to throw in, like what would be your top 3 tips?
Number one, like, yeah, if you notice any change in your cycle, just ask for help, and you might have to ask for help from multiple sources. So just keep asking for help until you get an answer, because there are answers out there. So you might have to dig a bit, as you were saying, but just please ask for help. It's definitely the number one thing. 2, I would say, like, reflect yourself on like how you're feeling stress wise, what your diet is like, what your exercise level is like, and just start to maybe tease through the puzzle a little bit yourself. And that's really hard, but by using, like, which is my top tip or my third tip, something like Fitter Woman or other apps out there around menstrual health are just so useful, because you have your diary, you know when you had your last period. Or likewise, like for me, like when I wasn't getting my period, but like I definitely had like the PMS symptoms, still getting the spots, but like not the period. And it was like so weird. I'd still be like the cranky person at a certain time. I'd still feel bloated or whatever, but like I wasn't getting, you know, my normal period with it. So yeah, like you will be able to track like the symptoms around it, and just get a handle on what things, and then that will be able to guide you with your self-reflection as well. So yeah, they'd be my 3 tips.
Perfect. I'm actually just going to quickly answer these questions because we could get some pop in. So I know one came in just asking about, if you come off the pill, should you start having regular periods? So depends on the person. Typically what they say is, and again, I would speak to your healthcare provider or your gynecologist about this, but from what I understand, it's in and around kind of 3 months. Sometimes it could be longer for different people, but they kind of say 3 to 6 months is typically how long it takes to get your natural cycle back. So if you aren't, kind of start investing in that a little bit more, you might kind of want to go get your hormone levels tested, and you can kind of do that through your GP or other kind of healthcare providers. And again, just kind of maybe start looking at those other factors that we discussed. It could be anything going on, so it's just important that you go and get it checked out. But typically, kind of, I think it's 3 to 6 months is when people say you should be getting your period back after being on the hormonal pill. And then with regards to, is it a fracture in a particular area? Again, typically, from what I understand, it's seen in, say, stress fractures in like shins and feet and stuff like that, to do with running sports, because again, it's kind of linked, or tends to be more prevalent in those sports, but it can be anything. So basically what happens is, if you aren't producing estrogen, progesterone, your bone mineral density goes down. And even if you kind of reduce your calories, if it's not like critical level where you've lost your period, but you're in that kind of like subclinical level, is what they call it, that even has a negative impact to your bone mineral density. But so that's going to impact everywhere, like spine, hips, legs, arms, like whatever. But again, it tends to kind of, stress fractures tend to show in areas that tend to come under repeated strain, which tend to be your feet, but you could be at risk of a fracture anywhere in your body. So it's important to be mindful of that. And then I guess for me, top three, it's probably very similar. First one would be tracking your cycle. So as you said, that's normally that's how you're going to kind of spot if something's going on, but also it's going to spot if you're getting some indicators that your hormones are coming back. So you may not have yet, say you're in kind of HA recovery and you're trying to figure out what's going on. You may not yet have had a bleed, but you might have other indicators that your hormones are starting to come back. So again, kind of cervical mucus might start kind of coming back in and around kind of ovulation. You might kind of, be breast might start getting sore again with the estrogen, which is a typical PMS symptom, but it's something that kind of comes in. Even just kind of like how your mood is feeling, your sex drive, like whether your energy is better, things like this, if you're tracking them, can help show you. And then again, if you do start introducing things like exercise and you have a knock-on impact, you can see that straight away through tracking. So it's important to keep that in mind. Second one, as you said as well, is go get help. So speak to a healthcare provider. Again, if you're kind of told it's nothing to be worried about, go get a second opinion. Try and figure out what the root cause is and get support for whatever that issue is for you. And if you're struggling, try and kind of, I guess, as you said, self-reflect on that and maybe get support with why the recovery process is challenged for you. And then the third one is just make sure you're eating enough, make sure you're managing your stress, doing all those kind of self-care things and not falling into the trap of more is better or go hard or go home. Like if you're doing that all the time, you're not going to actually get fitter, faster, stronger. You're just going to, you're just going to burn yourself out. Plug there for the gym. You're just going to burn out. So, just really, really prioritizing recovery in its complete sense through fueling and kind of getting in those deload weeks as well. So yeah, thanks so much. This is great.
No, it's nice. Thanks for having on. And
thanks for being my first guest. Oh, thanks very much. But yeah, as I said to everyone, I'll be posting more about this during the week, and I'll talk to Sinead afterwards. So I'll make sure I get all the kind of references in this, and I'll add it into the comments below so that we can kind of find whoever we discussed in this talk. But thanks so much for coming.
Super, no problem. See you
soon. Sinead. Thanks a million. Bye bye.